I called my son to ask where Christmas would be held this year. My daughter-in-law picked up the phone. She smiled faintly, her eyes polite yet cold, and replied, "He wasn't expecting you this Christmas." I stood still, holding the phone in my hand, unsure what to say. Her words weren't loud or harsh, but they were like a bucket of cold water on me. I heard every word, every pause behind them, and I knew right away that the he she spoke of was my son. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying what time it is where you are. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old. All my life, I've hosted Christmas for the family. Every year, it was the same. I baked gingerbread cookies, George hung the lights on the porch, and Daniel, my son, helped his father set up the tree in the living room. But this year, Daniel didn't answer the phone. Instead, Madison, his wife, did. "We'll be hosting at our place this year, Mom," Madison said evenly. "My family's coming over because of baby Sam. Everyone's really excited." I tried to sound cheerful. "Oh, that's wonderful. I can bring some gingerbread cookies like every year." Madison was silent for a few seconds, then spoke slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. "That won't be necessary, Mom. Daniel isn't expecting you this year." I felt my heartbeat slow. In my head, only 4 words remained. "Isn't expecting you." She ended the call politely, and then the line went dead. I sat down in my chair, staring out the window. The whole neighborhood was putting up Christmas lights, golden reflections dancing on the snow. Everything looked peaceful, except for the storm rising in my chest, a feeling both hollow and bitter, like I'd done something wrong, but didn't know what it was. George walked in and asked softly, "Was that Daniel on the phone?" I shook my head. Madison answered, "They aren't inviting us this year." He looked at me with concern. "Maybe they're just busy. Don't overthink it." I forced a smile, but deep down, I knew. There are ways to exclude someone without ever raising your voice. And Madison had just done it perfectly. Their house, in fact, was one I had bought. 4 years ago, Daniel said he wanted to settle down and buy a home near his job. I was thrilled and didn't hesitate to transfer $450,000, our entire life savings, to help with the down payment on an $890,000 house. Daniel took the loan under his name, and I co-signed it. I didn't think twice. I only thought, he's my son. After that, I paid for almost everything in that house. Italian leather sofa, $7,500. Walnut dining set, $3,200. Washer, refrigerator, dryer, $6,800. Beds, mattresses, rugs, $5,000. Roof repairs after the storm, $12,400. In total, more than $30,000, all carefully recorded in a small notebook in my desk drawer. Then, when Madison became pregnant, I covered all her hospital expenses, $18,000. Every month, I sent $1,200 for baby supplies. I never thought of it as a burden. I was just happy to make my son's life easier, to help my daughter-in-law feel cared for. But now, hearing he wasn't expecting you, I realized I might have been buying the wrong kind of affection. I had paid for everything: the roof, the furniture, the meals, the hospital bills, the gifts, the insurance, the taxes. But the one thing I could never buy was respect. I looked at the family photo on the wall. Daniel, as a child, sitting on my lap, smiling brightly, with George standing behind us. It was taken at Christmas in 1992, when I still believed that love alone could keep a family together. I never imagined there would come a day when my son would let someone else tell his mother she wasn't welcome. That night, I made a simple dinner: a bowl of chicken soup and some toast. George stayed quiet through the meal, occasionally glancing at me. I knew he wanted to comfort me, but between two old people, sometimes silence is the kindest way not to make the wound bleed again. After dinner, I brewed some tea and sat at the dining table, the same one I had bought for Daniel when he married Madison. I remembered every gift, every wish, every small hope I had sent, along with each thing I paid for. And now, all of it was inside a house I was no longer allowed to enter. I said softly, almost to myself, maybe the stupidest thing a mother can do is believe that money can keep love. George heard me and gently took my hand. "Evelyn," he said, "don't let them make you feel small. You've given so much, and that's never wrong." I smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had just faced a painful truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my head, gentle yet cruel. "He wasn't expecting you." I lay there in the dark, thinking about the past 4 years, the times I withdrew money, the times I sent gifts, the times I told myself, it's a mother's duty. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself, if love needs to be proven with money, is it still love at all? Outside, the sea breeze moved through the pine trees, carrying the faint sound of wind chimes. The house was quiet, but one thing inside me was no longer at peace: my faith. I knew from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. A week after that phone call, Daniel and Madison showed up at my door, carrying a leather briefcase and a strained smile. Madison spoke first, her voice soft and measured as always. "Mom, we came to help you with some paperwork, just a few small forms." I looked at them, still feeling the emptiness that had lingered since being left out of Christmas. I no longer knew what help even meant, when everything I had done for them was never seen as help, but as something simply expected. I invited them in. Madison placed the briefcase on the dining table, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of documents, carefully arranged. Daniel sat beside her, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the table, avoiding mine. "Mom," he began, "we just thought it'd be good for you to plan ahead. You know, just in case. A lot of older people get scammed these days. Madison has a friend in law, and they suggested something called a power of attorney." I asked slowly, "What kind of power of attorney?" Madison smiled and slid the papers toward me. "It's just a standard power of attorney, Mom. A protection form for seniors. You know, we just want to make sure that if you ever need help, we can handle things on your behalf. Bills, accounts, bank paperwork, nothing complicated." I opened the file. The scent of fresh paper mixed with her expensive perfume. Tiny printed words filled the page. Then I saw a line that sent a chill through me. The appointed agent shall have full legal authority over the grantor's assets, accounts, real estate, and financial decisions. I looked up. Madison was still smiling, but her eyes were ice cold. Daniel stared down, pretending to reread the first page. "Just sign here, Mom," he said. "It's just a formality so I can help pay your bills and manage your accounts." "You've been forgetting things lately. Probably just age catching up." I set the pen down and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I'm not signing anything. I still know exactly what I'm doing." The air in the room thickened. Madison forced a small smile. "Mom, please don't misunderstand. We're only trying to help. It might feel uncomfortable now, but this is really for your own good." "For whose good?" I asked. She fell silent. Daniel spoke next, his voice sharper than usual. "Mom, we're just looking out for you. No one's taking anything. Signing this won't change anything." I looked at my son, the one I had believed would protect me in my old age, and asked, "If I sign this house, these accounts, my retirement funds, who will they belong to?" He said nothing. I pushed the documents back toward them. "I don't need anyone managing my life for me." They left without another word. Madison kept her smile, but this time it had the sharp edge of challenge. 3 days later, I went to the bank to withdraw some cash. The teller, a young woman I often saw there, looked uneasy. "Mrs. Evelyn, your account has been temporarily frozen. There's a verification request from a co-owner." I frowned. "Co-owner? What co-owner?" She hesitated, then whispered, "The name listed is Daniel Harper, ma'am." It felt as if someone had slammed a door shut in my face. This house, this account, everything I had, now bore the name of the very person who had shut me out of my own Christmas. I called Madison. "Madison, the bank said my account is frozen. What's going on?" Her voice was calm, sweet, steady. "Oh, it's probably just a formality, Mom. I asked them to add Daniel's name to make banking easier for you. I just don't want you to risk any financial trouble or get scammed. You've been a bit forgetful lately, haven't you?" "Forgetful?" I repeated. "I mean, just little things. It's normal at your age. Don't worry, I've taken care of everything for you." The phrase, "I've taken care of everything for you," made my chest tighten. It wasn't care, it was control. I told George. He sat quietly, hands clasped. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," he said. I looked at him, my voice trembling. "George, do you remember who paid for that house? Who signed as guarantor for the loan? Who's been paying the property taxes for the last 3 years?" He nodded. "Then why do they treat me like some senile old woman?" George said nothing. I knew he felt the injustice, but confrontation had never been his strength. He was a man built to construct things that lasted, not to fight against his own blood. That evening, I sat alone in the living room. Daniel and Madison's wedding photo still hung on the wall. The frame I'd given them with a handwritten message, "May you always be grateful and cherish what you have." Now, that wish seemed painfully naive. No one ever taught me that love could become a double-edged sword, especially when it's wrapped in trust. I brewed myself a cup of tea, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. But the tea tasted more bitter than ever. Not because the leaves were old, but because I realized I had just been humiliated, not by words, but by the way they looked at me, as if I were incapable of running my own life. I had taught hundreds of children to write the sentence, "I am capable." But that night, for the first time in my life, I knew I had to relearn it myself. I sat in the house I had paid for, with a cup of cold tea beside me, and understood that nothing cuts deeper than being treated as useless in your own home. 3 days after my account was frozen, I went to see Linda Ross, my closest neighbor. She was a widow who lived alone across the street, the kind of woman who always had a hot cup of coffee ready when I stopped by. When I told her everything, from the power of attorney papers to the frozen bank account, Linda sat in silence for a long time. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder and said quietly, "Evelyn, this isn't simple anymore. They're trying to take away your rights. You need a lawyer, someone who specializes in elder protection." The word "take away your rights" sent a chill through me. I had spent my whole life teaching, paying taxes, paying off a home, raising a son, never once imagining I'd have to fight for the right to be considered competent. Linda introduced me to Mark Jensen, an attorney specializing in elder financial abuse. Mark came to my house on a foggy morning. He was about 45, tall, with a calm and steady voice. He listened as I told my story, never interrupting, only taking careful notes. When I finished, he asked, "Mrs. Harper, I need to clarify something. Have they ever taken you to see a psychologist or neurologist?" I shook my head. "No, but they've mentioned that I forget things. I think they might be preparing something." Mark nodded slowly. "I suspect they already have. I'll look into any medical paperwork tied to your name. For now, don't sign anything, and don't let them into the house unless I'm here." A few days later, Mark returned with a file folder in his hands. He set it on the table, his voice low. "I found what they're using to claim you're legally incompetent. This is a signed statement from a pharmacist named Paul Jenkins, stating that you've shown signs of cognitive decline and confusion with your medications." My eyes widened. "Paul Jenkins? I only buy cold medicine and vitamins from him. He's never examined me." Mark looked at me, his expression both sympathetic and firm. "I know. I spoke with him. Paul said Madison brought the form and told him it was just a quick signature to finalize an insurance claim. He didn't realize it was being used as legal evidence against you." I clenched my hands, my fingers trembling slightly. "They're inventing illnesses for me." Mark nodded. "That's exactly what they're doing. And now, we're going to show them they've gone too far." A few days later, Madison called, saying she wanted to talk things out civilly. I knew what that meant. They were preparing for confrontation. Mark told me to agree, but that he'd be present with me. That afternoon, they arrived, Madison, Daniel, and a woman I'd never seen before, Angela Torres, Madison's attorney. She wore a black suit, walked briskly, and had the confident gaze of someone used to winning. Madison spoke first, as if this were just a small misunderstanding. "Mom, we're here to resolve this cleanly. You've made such a fuss. The bank's confused. All you have to do is sign a new power of attorney, and everything will be fine." Mark stayed quiet. I looked at the three people in front of me and felt something eerie, how unfamiliar they seemed. My own son, who once put his arm around me on his college graduation day, now sat in silence like a stranger. I asked slowly, "Fine for who, Madison? For me or for you?" She smiled, but her lips didn't tremble. "For all of us, Mom. I'm just trying to help. Please sign it. It'll make everything easier." I leaned forward, my voice steady and low. "You want control over my money because you think I've lost my mind. But I remember every dollar I spent building the life you're living right now." No one spoke. Madison's face lost some color. Daniel took a deep breath. Angela straightened her papers and said, maintaining her polite tone, "Mrs. Harper, my client only wants to assist you. But if you continue to refuse, we'll have no choice but to petition the court for legal guardianship." Mark looked up, his voice cold. "Go ahead. But before you file, make sure you know what happens to those who present falsified medical evidence in court." Madison froze. Daniel looked from Mark to me, as if wishing the whole conversation would just end. I stood, facing my son. "Daniel, let me ask you one thing. If I'm truly as weak as you say, why are you letting someone else treat your mother this way?" He lowered his head, said nothing. They left in silence. As the door closed, Mark said softly, "You just did the hardest thing, Evelyn. Facing the people you love after they've betrayed you." I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The fear was gone. What I felt now was resolve. "Mark," I said, "file the lawsuit. I want them to know I'm still of sound mind, and I will protect what's mine." He nodded. "We'll file a civil claim and petition the court to void all account access and transactions they've made." That night, I sat at my desk and wrote down every dollar I'd ever spent on Daniel and Madison: the down payment, furniture, hospital bills, monthly support. The total came to $34,200. I stared at the number for a long time before whispering to myself, "I thought I was giving out of love. But maybe all I did was pay to be disrespected." Before Mark left, he said, "Mrs. Harper, what matters now isn't the money. It's proving that they don't get to make your decisions for you anymore." I stood by the window, watching the Christmas lights twinkle across the street. This year, there was no tree, no dinner, no family. But I had something I'd lost long ago: my will. I whispered to myself, like a vow, "If they want to fight, I'll fight, but not with tears, with clarity." And I knew, in that moment, the real battle had just begun. The trial opened on a freezing January morning. The Oregon sky was a dull gray, and fog cloaked the courthouse steps. I walked slowly, clutching the folder Mark had handed me, my heart heavy, not from fear of losing, but from the disbelief that I had to stand before a judge to defend myself against my own son. Inside the courtroom, Madison sat beside Daniel, perfectly composed, her face cold and confident, as if this were nothing more than a business negotiation. Beside them was Angela Torres, Madison's attorney, impeccably dressed, sharp-eyed, every movement deliberate. Mark sat next to me, calm as ever. "Just tell the truth, Evelyn," he whispered. "I'll handle the rest." Madison began with a flawless performance. Her voice trembled at the right moments, tears appearing on cue. "Your Honor, we never wanted things to go this far. We just wanted to protect Mom, Evelyn, She's been a little forgetful lately, signing the wrong papers, missing bill payments. I was just afraid someone might take advantage of her." She paused, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Daniel sat beside her, head bowed, playing the role of the helpless son caught between his wife and his mother. I listened without a word. I wasn't angry anymore, just detached. Every line out of Madison's mouth was calculated, just virtuous enough to sound concerned, just manipulative enough to make others doubt me. Then Mark Jensen rose to speak. He didn't need theatrics or volume. His voice was steady, precise, and each sentence sliced through Madison's performance like a blade through silk. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs claim they only wanted to protect Mrs. Harper. But may I ask, protect her how? By falsifying a medical statement from pharmacist Paul Jenkins, declaring my client cognitively impaired, when Mr. Jenkins himself admitted he was deceived into signing it? By adding Daniel Harper's name to his mother's private bank account without her consent? Or by drafting a power of attorney that handed full financial control to themselves?" The courtroom fell silent. Madison shifted slightly in her seat, her composure cracking. Mark picked up another file, his voice calm but edged with steel. "These are the bank transfer records from the past 4 years, showing Mrs. Harper provided $34,200 in financial support to Daniel and Madison. Here are receipts for furniture, insurance, and property taxes, all paid directly by Mrs. Harper, with her signature and handwriting. And here is a statement from the bank, verifying that Mrs. Harper was fully lucid during all transactions." He turned his gaze toward Madison. "If Mrs. Harper is truly incompetent, then how has she managed her finances to the penny for over 40 years, including after her husband's retirement? Without once missing a tax deadline?" Madison stood abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. "We only acted on legal advice and family concern. Mom isn't the same as before." Mark didn't let her regain control. "Changed, you say? Your Honor, if change means Mrs. Harper finally learned to set boundaries on her kindness, then I'd call that clarity, not madness." A low murmur spread across the room. Angela rose to object, but her voice shook. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. When the arguments ended, the judge, a silver-haired man with a calm, deliberate tone, spoke. "The court has reviewed all documents, testimony, and evidence. Mrs. Evelyn Harper shows no signs of cognitive impairment. The power of attorney obtained under coercion and deception is hereby void. This court orders the full restoration of Mrs. Harper's financial rights and suspends Madison Harper's legal practice pending investigation for fraud and misrepresentation." His words weren't loud, but to me, they rang like a bell. I hadn't won by luck. I had simply reclaimed what should never have been taken: my autonomy. Daniel stood, head down, avoiding my gaze. As people began leaving the courtroom, he lingered behind, then walked over. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't think it would come to this. I never wanted to hurt you." I met his eyes, calm and steady. "You didn't have to want it, Daniel. You just had to stop before it happened." He said nothing. Just like all the other times, silent when he should have spoken. Then he turned, and walked toward Madison, who was dodging reporters' cameras. That afternoon, I sat in the car with Mark on the way home. He asked, "How do you feel, Evelyn? How does victory feel?" I looked out the window at the gray sky, the trees sliding past through sheets of cold rain. "Victory?" I murmured. "I don't feel like I won, Mark. I feel like I just buried a part of my family." He didn't reply, only nodded quietly. We both knew some verdicts bring justice, but they can't bring back love. That night, back home, I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames flicker. George poured me a cup of tea and said softly, "I knew you'd win." I smiled faintly. "Win?" All I did was take back what never should have been taken. I looked at the old photo on the wall. Daniel as a boy, beaming in my arms. The picture had faded, but his smile back then was still bright and pure. I wondered when my son had disappeared, and when this man, the one who let his wife call his mother senile, took his place. The fire burned lower. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Justice never comes early, and when it does, it brings no joy, only truth, bare and cold." And in that quiet house, I knew I had won. But it was the kind of victory that leaves a mother with no son left to lean on. After the trial, the old house grew so heavy that every footstep echoed like a memory I wanted to forget. George and I decided to sell it. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew we no longer belonged there. The house that had once been our pride was now a monument to phone calls, forged papers, and dry tears shed after justice was finally served. We sold it and moved to a small cottage by the Oregon coast, where the waves broke in rhythm, the wind carried the scent of salt, and mornings began with silver light spilling through the window. It wasn't luxurious, and there was nothing expensive inside. But it had something we'd lost long ago: peace. I started over. At 68, that might sound strange, but I'd never felt more alive. I signed up to volunteer at a free reading program for underprivileged children at the local community center. The kids came from working-class families nearby, thin, tousle-haired, cautious eyes that avoided strangers. I taught them how to sound out words, how to read aloud, how to keep rhythm in a sentence. There was a little girl named Rachel Kim, 10 years old, Korean American, who reminded me of myself when I was young. She was bright, quiet, and whenever she misread a word, she'd bite her lip hard, afraid of being scolded. I often told her, "It's all right, Rachel. We learn to understand, not to be afraid." Those afternoons filled the little classroom with laughter and a kind of humble pride. After years of suffocating under pretense, I was finally surrounded by truth. Children who didn't fake emotions, kindness that didn't come with strings attached. One morning, Linda brought over the local newspaper and said, "Evelyn, you should write. Your story could help people." I thought about it all night. In the end, I sent the paper a short piece titled "When Kindness Becomes a Chain," about parents who unintentionally become victims of their own children. I didn't name anyone. I just told it honestly, without bitterness, without blame. A week later, the editor wrote back, thanking me. The piece had received over 100 responses. Some said they cried. Some said they'd lived the same thing, betrayed by their own children. I kept writing, one article a month, about kindness being exploited, about the limits of love, about the art of saying no without guilt. I realized that what I was writing wasn't just to help others, it was helping me. One afternoon, while I was sorting through my drafts, there was a knock on the door. George answered, then turned toward me quietly. "It's Daniel." I froze. My son stood at the door, thinner, unshaven, eyes filled with both regret and hesitation, like a man asking permission to enter a house that no longer belonged to him. I invited him in. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. "I'm separated from Madison," Daniel said softly. "She moved to New York." "I know," I replied evenly. "I read about it online." He lowered his head. "I'm not here for money, Mom. I just wanted to talk." "Do you hate me?" I looked at the son who had been my pride for half my life. I thought of all the years I had used money to cover the cracks in our relationship and realized hatred no longer had a place in me. I said quietly, "No, I don't hate you. I just stopped needing your approval to feel like a mother." Daniel looked up, eyes glistening. Maybe he wanted to say something, but didn't. Sometimes grown men don't know how to apologize, especially when the wound runs too deep. He stood, glanced around the cottage, and said, "This place is beautiful. You look peaceful." "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "I'm learning to live like a free person." He nodded and left. I didn't walk him out. I just stood by the window. When his car disappeared behind the pines, I felt an unexpected lightness. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer being bound by the pain. In the months that followed, I began learning how to spend money on myself without guilt. I cut my hair short, bought a pale blue linen dress I'd wanted for years, and took morning walks along the beach with George. I no longer cared what others thought of me. I no longer gave to be loved back. I simply lived. Simply, quietly, honestly. Our little house was always full of laughter. Linda still came over for tea every week. Rachel often visited, proudly showing me the books she'd finished. I kept writing for the paper, and one day, the editor invited me to speak at a community seminar on financial abuse within families. I didn't hesitate. I had lived it, and I knew how many others still lived in the shadow of that distorted kind of love. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch, watching the waves roll in. The air was salty, the breeze oddly warm. George sat beside me, reading the paper. I said quietly, "You know, I used to think justice was something grand. But really, it's just the moment you're brave enough to start living for yourself." He folded the paper and smiled. "I think you found yourself again, Evelyn." I shook my head gently. "No, I haven't found myself. I've learned how to create her." I watched the sunset spill gold across the sea, my heart at peace. My world is smaller now. No parties, no hollow reunions, no sun I once thought was everything. But it's real. I'm no longer the woman labeled confused or useless. I am Evelyn Harper, who walked through betrayal, humiliation, justice, and in the end, redeemed her own life. I stood in the grand hall of the State Conference Center, where the seminar, Elder Financial Abuse, Protecting Dignity, Protecting Ourselves, was being held. Hundreds of chairs lined the floor in neat rows. On the stage, a pale blue banner hung behind the podium, its white letters gleaming softly. Protecting dignity, protecting ourselves. I wore a simple beige dress, holding the stack of notes I had spent weeks preparing. When I was invited to speak, I walked to the stage slowly but steadily. No trembling, no fear. A soft wave of applause rose. I looked out over the audience, lined faces, tired eyes, and a few young people listening intently. Some had lost everything. Some were still living under the shadow of suspicion, afraid of their own children. I spoke in a calm, measured voice, not to tell a tragedy, but to share a lesson. A year ago, I thought I would never be strong enough to tell my story. I was afraid of being called a fool, a failure, a mother who let her son and daughter-in-law turn her into a joke. But now I understand. Truth never makes us smaller. It only makes us clearer. I told them everything, from the Christmas phone call and the words, "He wasn't expecting you," to the forged power of attorney, the courtroom, and the day I finally stood up for myself. There was no bitterness in my tone, no anger, only the quiet conviction of someone who had learned that healing could also be a way of becoming whole again. The room was silent. Someone lowered their head, wiping away tears. I paused, then ended with one last line. We may lose money, reputation, and trust, but we must never lose the right to choose, because the moment we dare to say no, that's when we truly begin to live. Afterward, people came to shake my hand, to thank me, to share their own stories. I smiled, nodded, exchanged gentle words. As the crowd thinned, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the back of the hall. Daniel. He wasn't in a suit, just a plain shirt, his face thinner, his eyes shadowed and weary. Under the soft light, he stood still, hands in his pockets, as if afraid to intrude. I walked toward him. We looked at each other in silence. A year had passed. No calls, no messages. Yet, in that moment, words weren't needed. I understood. Daniel spoke first, his voice trembling slightly. I heard your speech, Mom, and I realized how wrong I was. I used to think you were weak, always too forgiving, but now I understand. He stopped. A tear rolled down his cheek. I answered softly, but firmly. I wasn't weak, Daniel. I was kind. And there's a long road between kindness and weakness. You just never saw it. He lowered his head. Can you forgive me? I smiled gently. Forgiveness is mine to give. But redemption, that's yours to earn. He nodded, eyes wet. No excuses, no defenses, just the silence of someone who finally understood. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not an embrace, but a quiet, full stop. When I left the conference center, the rain had started to fall in a thin mist. The street glistened, Christmas lights reflecting across the wet pavement. I pulled my collar up and walked slowly through the parking lot. The air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. At the corner, a group of people were setting up a tall Christmas tree. Laughter drifted through the air, bright and familiar. I stopped for a moment, watching the lights flicker, and smiled. This year, no one was expecting me. But unlike last year, I didn't feel alone, because I finally understood. I didn't need to be invited or expected to belong to my own life. I took a deep breath and kept walking, my voice echoing softly in my mind, steady and clear. They once said, "He wasn't expecting you." But I've learned I don't need to be expected to live my own life. I walked on through the rain, tightening my scarf. The lights shimmered gold on the wet road. The wind brushed softly past. And for the first time in years, I felt something rare and pure: freedom.